Tart, she was supposed to be his victim, a brilliant woman, saved and kidnapped by the most dangerous man in Asia. But he didn't know. He kidnapped the wrong woman. And now, his empire belongs to her. Shanghai never truly slept, but at midnight it tightened its jaw, glittering harder, breathing faster, as if bracing for something it couldn't name. Soren, Silence Park, stepped out of the shadow of a glass tower, dressed in black from throat to boots, the rain turning his hair into silver-dipped strands. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in Shanghai. Not tonight. Not hunting. His phone buzzed in his hand, its message clear, urgent. Intel from one of his most trusted informants. A rival syndicate was making aggressive moves behind his back, but what caught his attention wasn't just their activities. It was the name his source whispered into the line, Omondi. The woman was dangerous, brilliant, a financial genius who'd single-handedly disrupted major markets across Africa and Asia. Her rise in Shanghai had caught everyone's eye, but the question was, why had her name reached his ears now? And whoever wanted her gone had hired men too arrogant to understand what they were walking into. Soren's mind spun. Omondi, an accomplished senior investment banker, had made a name for herself in Shanghai's high-stakes finance world. Known for her razor-sharp financial analysis and ability to turn failing companies into empires, she was a force in global finance, a mastermind in mergers and acquisitions, risk management, and corporate restructuring. What few knew, however, was her deeper, more dangerous side. Before her rise in investment banking, Jewel had worked as an economic consultant for several governments, navigating the complexities of international markets and geopolitical risks. She was a strategist at heart, using her vast knowledge of political economics to expose the corruption running deep within the financial systems. But it was her secret activism, unmasking money laundering, tax evasion, and illegal financial dealings, that had made her a target. Jewel's growing influence and her ability to pinpoint vulnerabilities in even the most secure empires had caught the attention of those who profited from the shadows, including the syndicates controlling the underworld of international finance. Her work, unknowingly, had placed her directly in the crosshairs of those who needed her silenced. And that was why she became Soren's problem, whether he realized it or not. She was far more than just a rising star. She had been targeting his enemies, not with a gun, but with her intelligence, her sharp mind cutting through financial underworlds like a scalpel. She didn't know it yet, but she had been shredding the hidden threads of Soren's competition, putting their dirty money schemes at risk without even realizing it. Her recent financial maneuvers were shaking the very foundation of a syndicate under his control, the Black Lotus. No one had the right to make moves like that in his territories, and someone clearly felt the same. He had received word. Someone had placed a bounty on Jewel's head, a contract for her death. And if she died, a rival syndicate would rise. Soren's enemies would control that power and expand into territory he couldn't afford to lose. This wasn't just about her. It was about his empire shrinking. It was about control slipping. He needed to stop it before anyone realized what she was truly capable of. Soren stepped off the helicopter that night as if he were the storm itself. The city felt different under his feet tonight. Tense, ready to break. He could smell the volatility in the air. Something was wrong. As his eyes scanned the area, his heart began to race with a gut instinct he rarely had. This wasn't an accident. His intel had been precise. And now, he stood in the right place at the right time. He hadn't authorized any of this. He hadn't sanctioned this hit. The Black Lotus, his syndicate. Someone had gone rogue. Someone had decided that Jewel's intelligence was worth silencing. Jewel walked out of the Grand Meridian building, phone pressed to her ear, heels tapping in a rhythm too confident for a woman marked for execution. Her Nairobi-born poise turned heads even at this hour. Tall, power in her posture, calm in her stride, a woman who made deals big enough to threaten the wrong empires. Soren's eyes narrowed as the three assassins closed in on her. They had no idea they were walking into the most dangerous territory in the world. His territory. He wasn't saving Jewel because of any misplaced heroism. He wasn't saving her out of some twisted sense of justice. He was saving her because her death would affect his empire. The Black Lotus was his, and they had moved without his permission, without his command. That was unacceptable. Saurin watched the first assassin step from behind the taxi line. The second rose from a crouch near the lamppost. The third adjusted his coat to hide a blade. They didn't see Saurin. They never did. A single breath, 11 seconds, and the quiet street became a battlefield. The first man's wrist snapped before he even lifted his gun. The second's neck cracked like a dry twig. The third managed a grunt before Saurin's blade whispered across his throat. When the bodies hit the ground, the street fell brutally silent. Jewel turned. No scream, no stumble, not even a gasp. She simply lowered her phone, brows drawn in mild annoyance, as if he'd interrupted her conversation, not saved her life. Her eyes swept the scene. 3 dead men. 1 man standing. And then, with crisp surgical clarity, she said, "Your security team is sloppy. I could hire better." Soren stared at her. He, the man who had dismantled a generation of mob bosses, who had carved fear into the bones of Seoul, Tokyo, and half of East Asia, stood there stunned. Her tone wasn't gratitude. It was critique. A slow, electric irritation unfurled in his chest. No woman had ever spoken to him like that. No woman had ever dared. Jewel stepped over one of the bodies, careful not to stain her ivory heels, and tucked her phone into her clutch. "Next time," she added, lifting her chin, "arrive before the first shot, not after." That was it. That was the moment. The exact second Soren's carefully muted world short-circuited, not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was brilliant, though he knew her reputation, but because she had just insulted the most lethal man in Asia. Without flinching, she walked away. He let her. But Soren stayed in the shadows long enough to watch her blend into the Shanghai night. Any other man would have let her go. He wasn't any other man. He is the sovereign of Seoul. She wasn't targeted by accident. Her brilliance was a weapon, and she didn't even know she just cut one of his enemies in half. By noon, he made the decision. Not out of mercy, not out of strategy, out of irritation, and fascination so sharp he felt it under his skin. The black SUV cut her off outside her apartment. Her guards never saw his men coming, and when the door slid open, Soren sat there. Calm, collected, lethal. "Get in," he said. "I have meetings," she replied. "Not today." Her eyes narrowed. "Is this supposed to intimidate me?" "No." His voice was a quiet blade. "This is me keeping you alive for the week." He watched the realization settle in her gaze. Not fear, but calculation. She climbed into the SUV, not because she was threatened, but because she was curious. Soren leaned back. "You're coming with me to Korea." "For what?" "My 7-day vacation." His eyes held hers. "You're a part of it now." Jewel crossed her legs, unimpressed. "You're kidnapping the wrong woman." Something flickered in Soren's expression. Something predatory and intrigued. The corner of his mouth lifted, slow and precise. The first true smile he'd given in years. The helicopter sliced through the morning fog as Korea's mountains rose like dark, ancient guardians. Jewel sat across from Soren, arms folded, eyes steady, refusing to give him even a flicker of unease. Soren watched her from the corner of his eye. Most people avoided his gaze. She met it as if daring him to blink first. He didn't, not once, but something coiled in his chest, a sharp, unwelcome awareness that she saw him too clearly, too easily. When the helicopter lowered onto the estate's private helipad, Jewel expected chains, a dungeon, a room with no windows. Instead, she found something far more unsettling. Luxury, order, quiet power. Below them stretched a mountainside empire, terraced vineyards glittering with morning dew, a courtyard paved with black stone, glass walls reflecting a sky too blue to be trusted, 27 guards in synchronized formation, and at the far end, a training field where assassins ran drills with military precision, knives flashing like silver streaks in the light. Jewel stepped out and breathed in air that tasted like pine and danger. Soren's voice slid behind her, calm, arrogant, almost amused. "Welcome to my vacation home." She didn't turn. Overcompensation is a disease, you know. That earned her a low exhale, not quite a laugh, but the closest thing she'd extracted from him. He escorted her through halls of stone and glass, past silent guards who avoided her eyes, not out of contempt, but caution. They'd seen Saurin drag in enemies before. None walked freely beside him. Jewel did. She assessed him. Then she assessed everything else. Her room wasn't a prison. It was a suite overlooking vineyards and mountains. A wardrobe stocked in her size showed preparation. A desk with expensive stationery showed thoughtfulness. If not for her, then for someone like her. "Make yourself comfortable," Saurin said. She walked in, touched nothing, and faced him. Comfort is irrelevant. Her chin lifted. "But I will require a laptop." "Denied," he said instantly. "Then a notebook." Silence. He knew she was already planning something. She didn't deny it. 6 a.m. The estate watches the wrong woman. Jewel woke to the sound of metal clashing and men shouting. She pushed aside the curtains. Below her window, a squad of elite fighters sparred in the cold morning air. Their breath rose in clouds, their movements sharp enough to slice the dawn. She watched for 10 seconds and spotted 3 inefficiencies. Her eyes narrowed. So this was the vacation. 7 a.m. Soren's first underestimation. Soren found her in the kitchen, not cowering, not brooding, making coffee, for his guards. 27 hardened men stood at awkward attention as Jewel poured each cup with casual authority. One muttered, "Ma'am, you don't have to." "Don't call me ma'am. I'm not 60 and I don't own a church hat," she replied. A few guards stifled a snort. Saurin entered at that precise moment, expectation hanging on him like a tailored suit. "Jewel," he said slowly, "what are you doing?" "Improving morale." "By making coffee?" "No." She handed a guard a cup. "By explaining how compound interest works." Saurin blinked. "You're teaching my men? Investing?" "They're loyal to you," she said simply. "But loyalty grows deeper when a man knows his children's future is secure." The guard nearly teared up. Saurin's jaw tightened. He needed control. She walked in and rearranged the air molecules. 12 p.m. Jewel sat at the dining table flipping through a stack of documents that weren't supposed to exist in this house. "How did you get those?" he asked coldly. "You shouldn't leave internal financials open on your desktop." He froze. She didn't pause. "These tax entries?" She tapped the page. "Half of them are misreported. Sloppy. And this offshore structure?" She slid another sheet forward. "There's a loophole that exposes you to unnecessary scrutiny." Saurin stepped closer, shadows gathering around him. "Jewel." She didn't look up. "I'm not done." His pulse kicked. He wasn't used to interruptions. He wasn't used to corrections. He wasn't used to women who didn't fear him, worship him, or try to seduce him. Jewel was indifferent. Indifference was lethal. 2 p.m. Jewel placed a third folder on the table. "This man," she said, tapping the page, "is stealing from you." Soren's lids lifted a fraction. "He's loyal." "He's lying." "How do you know?" She angled the page to him. "Because he inputs numbers like someone who doesn't understand the underlying market. Only someone copying from somewhere else." Soren stared at her, like she was a mirror that reflected parts of him he'd buried. Then he turned and gave a single order. "Bring him in." Within minutes, the traitor was dragged into the hall, pale and trembling. A confession spilled out before Soren even raised a hand. Jewel didn't flinch. Soren noticed. 7 p.m. By sundown, Jewel had reorganized more of his empire in 24 hours than any of his advisors had in years. But that wasn't the part that unsettled him. It was the way she moved through his world with a calm that rivaled his own. It was the way his men looked at her, with respect, curiosity, even admiration. It was the way she spoke to him, always steady, always sharp, never intimidated. She didn't see him as a god, or a monster, or a myth. She saw him as a man, and that terrified him in ways bullets never had. 11 p.m. He found her on the balcony, hair blowing in the cold wind, arms on the railing. Moonlight carved her profile into something almost haunting. "You've been busy," he said. "Your systems are inefficient." "Oh, I noticed." His voice lowered. "Everyone here noticed." She finally turned to him. "Do you want gratitude?" "No," he answered honestly. "I want comprehension." "Of what?" "That you are not in control." Jewel gave him a slow, devastating smile. "Soren," she said softly, "your mistake is thinking control impresses me." He stepped closer, too close, close enough to feel her breath. "And what does?" For the first time all day, she paused, just a beat, a single unguarded moment. Then she turned away, her voice barely above the wind. "Consistency, truth, decency, things you haven't practiced in years." The words hit him harder than any bullet he'd ever taken. Soren didn't respond, couldn't, because for the first time in his empire, his estate, his world, he felt small and human and drawn to a woman he had absolutely no control over. He hated it. He wanted more of it, and he had no idea what that meant. By the third morning, Soren Park Silence, the destroyer, the man whose name made syndicates tremble, realized something was wrong. Not wrong with his estate, not wrong with his men, wrong with him. Because Jewel Omondi was unmoved. He had kidnapped her, placed her inside his fortress, surrounded her with danger, luxury, and power. And she behaved like she was auditing a client. Soren stood at the end of the dining hall as she ate a quiet breakfast of rice, steamed eggs, and tea, completely serene. He had spent years mastering the art of psychological dismantling. Women fell, men bowed, enemies cracked beneath silence, and the cold precision in his gaze. So he tried what worked on everyone. Test 1. The stare down. Soren stepped into the dining hall without a sound. He stopped 5 paces from her and waited. No greeting, no question, just the full weight of his presence, the kind that made grown men feel their bones shrink. Jewel lifted her eyes for 3 seconds. 3. Then she went back to pouring tea. He blinked. His men, watching from the doorway, whispered, "Is she blind or suicidal?" She didn't even flinch. Soren ground his teeth and walked out. He would try something else. Test 2. Proximity. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Jewel reviewed estate ledgers she had no clearance to access. Soren approached silently from behind, close enough that she could hear the quiet exhale of his breath, close enough that no one else had ever dared stand without breaking. He leaned a hand on the back of her chair, lowering his voice to the edge of her neck. Comfortable? She didn't turn. I prefer higher yields, she said calmly, adjusting a spreadsheet. Your hedge strategy is lazy. His hand tightened imperceptibly. Lazy? No one had ever called him lazy. She did not move away. She did not blush, tremble, or acknowledge his nearness. She treated him like office furniture. He inhaled through his nose. Slow, controlled, furious. She changed the subject with the cruelty of someone who didn't care about his ego. And please tell your men to stop trying to intimidate me with shoulder holsters. It's distracting, and not in the way they hope. His jaw flexed. He had been the predator for years. Now he felt studied, observed, handled. He didn't like it. Test 3. The sword. By late afternoon, Saurin resorted to the move that had undone dozens of women and intimidated hundreds of enemies. He trained, shirtless, on the terrace, blades slicing through cold mountain air, muscles moving like the well-oiled architecture of war. He didn't look at her. He knew she was watching. Everyone watched. He was a weapon sculpted by rage and grief, every strike a story no one survived. Except Jewel did not appear. She didn't even step outside. After 20 minutes, he found her in the estate office sorting files like an accountant during tax season. He stood in the doorway, chest still rising with adrenaline, sweat glistening on his skin. She didn't look up. He waited. She turned a page. He cleared his throat. She adjusted a chair. He tightened his grip on his blade. Finally, she asked without looking, "Are you lost?" Soren had been insulted before, but never with that level of absolute disinterest. He walked out, blade in hand, wondering if madness was contagious. Test 4. The temperature. At 7 p.m., he ordered the estate temperature dropped to 12 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make anyone shiver, cold enough to force vulnerability. Jewel stepped into the lounge wearing a simple sweater, curls tied back, a pen between her fingers. She did not shiver. She did not wrap her arms around herself. Instead, she said, "If you're trying to induce hypothermia, you'll need colder or a longer exposure." He stared. She continued casually, "Also, your staff is annoyed. Cold environments increase calorie burn and tension, which decreases operational efficiency. So unless you want slower guards, turn it back to 18. Soren's hand twitched. He signaled to raise the temperature again. He turned away. He needed a new strategy. She spoke before he took a step. "Your father taught you that people break in the cold, didn't he?" Soren froze, very slowly. He looked over his shoulder. Jewel's face softened. Not pity, but understanding so sharp he wished it were a blade. "You're trying to recreate what shaped you," she said. "But trauma doesn't build strength. It builds armor. And you mistake armor for growth." His breath stilled. "Your father's betrayal didn't turn you into a monster." Her voice remained steady. "You used it to justify who you already wanted to be." Silence swallowed the room. A silence that felt personal, exposed, dangerous. Soren took a single step toward her, then another. A storm gathered behind his eyes. Dark, violent, ancient. "Soren," she added quietly, "you're not the man you pretend to be." He didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat locked. His pulse hammered. The world narrowed to the woman who dared name truths he had buried under cities of blood. Then he left the room like a storm ripping through its own path. The doors shook behind him. 2 guards in the hall exchanged a whisper. No one talks to the destroyer like that. She didn't just talk. She saw him. Soren paced the hallway. shoulders rising and falling with uncharacteristic breaths. He had not been outmaneuvered emotionally since he was 16, since the night everything in him died, and now, a woman he kidnapped, a woman whose life he controlled down to the air she breathed, was dismantling him with accuracy more lethal than any gunshot. He braced a hand against the wall. His pulse wouldn't slow. His mind wouldn't still. And beneath the fury, the humiliation, the raw ache of being seen, was a truth Soren Park did not know how to survive. He wanted more of her, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The fourth day dawned cold over the mountains, an iron-gray sky stretching above the estate like a warning. Jewel woke before sunrise. So did Saurin, not because either intended to, but because they were at war. Not a war of fists or blades, but something far more intimate, combat of mind, clash of pride, collision of will. Every interaction sparked like flint striking steel. Jewel entered the dining hall with a folder under her arm. Papers she had no authorization to access, but reviewed anyway. Soren stood at the window, hands behind his back, posture straight as a blade. When he turned, his eyes glinted with the cold discipline that shaped him. "You're early," he said. "I'm efficient." He motioned to the chair. She ignored the gesture and remained standing. The first blow. He didn't show irritation, but a muscle in his jaw betrayed him. "What's in the folder?" he asked. "Your quarterly statements." "You had no clearance." "You left them in my path." "I did not." "Then someone on your staff wants your finances reevaluated." A guard coughed loudly behind them. Soren shot him a look that promised violence later. Jewel pretended not to notice. She opened the folder. "Your overseas operations operate at 81% efficiency. You could be at 96%. Soren stepped closer. "And you assume you know my empire better than I do?" "I don't assume," she said calmly. "I calculate." The second blow. He leaned in. "You're in my home, Jewel." She met his gaze without flinching. "Exactly. And your home has inefficiencies." The third blow. He straightened slowly, controlled, cold, but undeniably rattled. He was losing ground. Later that morning, Soren found her inside his private training room, observing murals of ancient Korean warlords and diagrams of martial forms. His sanctuary. "Curiosity," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "is dangerous." "It's only dangerous if I care about being punished." "You should." "Why?" she asked. "Your punishments seem predictable. Anger, silence, intimidation. All very standard." He stepped forward, closing the space until she had to tilt her chin upward. "You think you know me?" he asked quietly. "I understand your categories," she answered. "Men like you have types. Enlighten me." "Men who can destroy the world," she said, "but can't bear to be seen." That struck him like a blade beneath the ribs. So he retaliated by beginning the story he never told anyone voluntarily. He spoke with the precision of a man carving himself open with a scalpel. "My father taught me loyalty by betraying it." Jewel didn't interrupt. He continued. "I was 16 when he sold me out to save himself. He called me his son and then offered me as currency." His voice was flat, but the memory pulsed beneath his skin like an old scar reopening. "I learned that love is leverage. Kindness is manipulation. Attachment is a weakness others exploit." He stepped back, breathing hard in a way he hated, like the memory had hands on his throat. "That's why I don't let anyone close," he finished. "I can't." Silence filled the training room. Jewel considered him, not pitying, not softening, but processing. Then she said the words that shattered him. "That's not trauma. That's the excuse you hide behind." Soren blinked, once, slowly. "What did you say?" You survived something terrible. Yes, but what you became afterward wasn't survival. It was choice. His pulse thudded painfully. You weaponized pain, she continued. You used it to justify becoming exactly the man it's convenient for you to be. No, he snapped. Yes, she said, unflinching. You took hurt and turned it into armor, so you'd never have to grow, never have to heal, never have to be accountable. Her voice was calm, deadly, surgical. I'm not negating what happened to you. I'm correcting your narrative. You're not a monster because someone made you one. You chose the parts that benefited you. His breath went ragged. His chest rose once, sharply, and without another word. Soren turned and left the room like a storm tearing its way out of a city. The door slammed with an authority that made dust scatter. Guards outside exchanged glances, murmuring as the echo faded. No one talks to the destroyer like that. She didn't just talk, she dissected him. He didn't even threaten her. That's the scary part. Inside the hallway, Soren pressed his palm against the wall, head bowed for a moment, breathing like a man wrestling a ghost. He hadn't been outmaneuvered emotionally since he was 16. He'd never been seen this clearly. Not by lovers, not by allies, not by enemies. Jewel was the first person to rip the narrative out of his hands and replace it with truth. He hated her for it. He wanted her even more for it. He didn't know how to survive either emotion. That night, as guards gathered for their shift briefing, Soren appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes sharp, voice controlled but lethal. New order, he said. Everyone stood straighter. He looked down at them all like a king issuing judgment. Do not, under any circumstance, show preference for Jewel Omondi. A few blinked. A few swallowed. A few wondered if he was joking. He wasn't. And if she asks you for anything, he added, redirect her to me. The men nodded. The hall cleared. Soren turned away. His chest tightened. Not with pride, but with something dangerously close to fear. Fear of how fast she was rearranging his world. Fear of how quickly she was rearranging him. By sunrise, every guard, every staff member, every soul on the estate preferred Jewel. She'd won them over with a single smile, a pot of strong tea, a brilliant financial tip, and the uncanny ability to make everyone feel smarter, not smaller. They adored her. They trusted her. They followed her with their eyes. Even the estate dogs abandoned Soren's side and sat loyally at her feet during breakfast. And Jewel? She looked at Soren across the table with a cool, almost innocent expression, as if to say, your move. Soren Park, sovereign of soul, felt something new ignite inside him. Not anger, not annoyance, something far more dangerous. A hunger to win a war he didn't understand, and a desire for a woman who refused to be conquered. Or Soren Park had felt many things in his life. Rage, violence, cold satisfaction, cruel amusement, bone-deep numbness. But on the 5th day with Jewel Omondi, he felt something dangerous, unfamiliar, unforgivable. Not lust. He'd mastered lust long ago, not fascination. He consumed fascination and discarded it. It was something with teeth, something with gravity, desire, respect, loss of control, emotions he'd surgically removed 14 years ago. They were back because of her. Soren's response was swift and military. Feelings were liabilities. Attachments were weapons for others to use against him. So he took action. Move 1. Canceling meals. When Jewel arrived for breakfast, the table was empty. Where is he? She asked one guard. Busy, the guard stammered. She nodded, unbothered. When she arrived for lunch, Soren was gone. Dinner? Gone again. It should have thrown her off balance. Instead, she took her plate outside and ate under the sun like she owned the estate. Soren watched from the rooftop, irritated by his own pulse hammering in his throat. This wasn't working. Move 2. Relocating her room. He had her belongings moved to the farthest corner of the mansion, the east wing, where even the heating sometimes failed. She arrived, surveyed the room, and within 5 minutes, reorganized the furniture, fixed the heating dial, opened the curtains, and called the view adequate. Soren nearly snapped the pen in his hand when her calm report reached him. She said, sir, that your far wing lacks style. Style? Style? How dare she critique his architectural... He stopped. He was spiraling, losing control in real time. Move 3. Avoidance. He stopped crossing her path. He rewrote his entire day to avoid seeing her. He told himself it was discipline, distance, prevention. But at night, he found himself standing outside her door, not knocking, just standing, like a man fighting his own shadow. His avoidance should have shaken her. Women always chased him harder when he pulled away. But Jewel, she carried on like he'd ceased to exist. She discussed investments with his guards. She walked the vineyard like it was her personal thinking garden. She asked the chef how he sourced his produce. She corrected operational inefficiencies in the guard rotation schedule. And every time Soren passed a window, a doorway, a reflective surface, there she was, glowing, unbothered, untouchable, indifferent. Her indifference became a needle in his bloodstream, a constant ache, an obsession he couldn't name without choking. For the first time in his life, he was the one waiting for her attention. He was the one unsettled. He was the one losing. And Jewel? She remained steady, precise, and breathtakingly unmoved. By the 5th night, the tension in the estate felt alive. The walls hummed. The halls felt too small. Every breath Soren took felt like he was inhaling her name. When he saw her walking down the hallway toward the library, hair loose, wearing soft cotton, eyes tired but determined, the world slid out of his control. He stepped into her path. She paused, composed, not startled. Move, she said lightly. I need to speak with you. No, you need to control something, and I'm conveniently nearby. He exhaled sharply. Jewel, you avoided me all day. Continue the trend. She tried to step around him. He stepped with her. Then she looked up at him. Really looked. Her eyes were too calm for the storm in his chest. What do you want, Soren? He didn't know how to answer. He only knew he needed something. Her closeness, her voice, her attention, her acceptance, her challenge. It was instinct, impulse, emotion, all things he trained himself to kill. And yet, he leaned forward, just a fraction, drawn to her like metal pulled to a magnet. Jewel's breath hitched, or maybe that was his imagination. He moved closer, close enough to taste the warmth of her skin, close enough to feel her heartbeat through the air, close enough that the world tilted, and he tried to kiss her. Jewel stepped back, not abruptly, not dramatically. Just one quiet, decisive step, enough to cut the connection, enough to make his lungs freeze. Her voice was soft, clear, unmistakably firm. You don't want me, Soren, she said. You want to win. The words hit him dead center, right where no bullet had ever landed. He swallowed hard. Jewel, you want the challenge. You want the conquest. You want the thrill of something you can't control. Her gaze didn't tremble. You don't want me. Not in any way that matters. It was the most honest wound he had ever received, more painful than his father's betrayal, more precise than any blade. For the first time in 14 years, Soren Park was rejected for a reason that touched his soul. Not because he was feared, not because he lacked value, but because she saw what he was offering and found it empty. He stepped back, breathing unevenly. Jewel turned away, without fear, without hesitation, without regret. And with every step she took down that hall, Soren felt something inside him collapse. A throne overturned, a kingdom cracked, a man unmade, because she was right. And he hated that the truth came from her lips. By the 5th day, Soren's estate no longer belonged to Soren. It belonged to Jewel, not by force, not by seduction, not by manipulation, by competence, by clarity, by the undeniable gravity of a woman who altered every room she entered. His men, battle-hardened, disciplined, loyal to death, watched her with an admiration that bordered on reverence. They followed her financial explanations with brightened eyes. They obeyed her efficiently worded recommendations without question. And Soren watched it all with a heavy, quiet realization. He hadn't kidnapped an investment banker. He had kidnapped a mind that could run empires, a will that refused to bend, a woman he could not outmaneuver. For the first time in years, he felt small, human, humbled. He despised the feeling. He craved it all the same. Jewel walked into the war room, Soren's sacred terrain, his throne room, the nerve center of his empire, and placed a stack of folders on the table. His advisors looked from one to another, uncertain whether to breathe. She didn't care. Your profit margins in Southeast Asia, she began, are criminally inefficient. Outdated models, old alliances, dead weight consultants. She clicked the projector on. And your risk model hasn't been updated in 7 years. 7 heads whipped toward Soren. His eyebrow twitched, dangerously. Jewel didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't apologize. She pointed to the graph on the screen. I rebuilt it. Silence. Not the cold kind Soren commanded, but the stunned, reverent kind Jewel created. This forecast is impossible, one advisor whispered. Incorrect, Jewel corrected. It's ambitious. And doubling profits in 5 days, another said. I did it in 3, she replied. Soren inhaled sharply. His empire was ruthlessness. Hers was results. The two collided like tectonic plates, and his empire tilted. In the afternoon, she faced the 2 syndicates Soren had alienated with his usual diplomatic style. Brutal honesty, razor threats. Jewel walked into the negotiation suite with a white blouse, a notebook, and composure sharp enough to cut glass. 40 minutes later, both syndicates agreed to reconciliation, on her terms, with her projections. Soren found her afterward leaning over the balcony, the wind pulling at her curls. You repaired what I destroyed, he said quietly. No, she answered. I restructured what you neglected. He stared at her. This woman, this brilliant, infuriating, relentless woman, was saving pieces of him he didn't realize were bleeding. Later, Soren walked past the training field and froze. His elite guard stood around Jewel, listening as she drew diagrams on a whiteboard. When you negotiate, she explained, speak to profit, not pride. Fear drives compliance. Understanding drives loyalty. The men nodded, enthralled. Soren's jaw worked. She wasn't stealing them. She was elevating them, making them sharper, better, his. He should have been grateful. Instead, he felt unsettled because he was starting to understand the truth. She didn't belong to his world, but his world was already rearranging itself around her. That evening, Soren finally confronted what he had been avoiding. She wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't her captor. He was the one being held hostage by the way she thought, the way she challenged him, the way she saw through every armor he wore. He found her in the corridor, reviewing estate schematics. He stood there, hands in his pockets, swallowing something that tasted like surrender. "Pack your things," he said. Her brow lifted. "Excuse me?" "I'm returning you to Shanghai." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" His jaw worked before words came out. "Because keeping you here is beginning to cost me more than I can afford." Jewel stared at him, steady, bland. Then she closed the folder. "You kidnapped me," she said slowly. "You initiated this week. Finish your week like a man." The line hit him like a blade to the ribs. "Soren," she added, stepping closer, "don't start what you can't complete. I'm not a project you abandon." He felt a laugh bubbling in his chest. Unexpected, disarming, foreign. The dangerous one died in his throat. This was a real one, a laugh that tasted like truth. "You are impossible," he murmured. "You're welcome," she replied. That night, the sky cracked open. Wind howled against the windows. Rain slashed the estate like 1,000 wild arrows. Thunder shook the mountains. Inside, the storm was louder. Soren and Jewel stood in the center of the lounge, electricity snapping between them. "You infuriate me," he said. "You frustrate me," she returned. "You dismantled my empire. You let it stagnate. You challenge every word out of my mouth. You need it." His breath stuttered. The thunder outside cracked like the world splitting open. "You make me—" He stopped. He couldn't say it. Not desire, not admiration, not longing. Those were emotions he had killed in himself years ago. Jewel's eyes softened, but only for a second. "You are terrifying," she said quietly, "but not because of your power." He stepped closer, dangerously close. "Then why?" "Because you don't know the difference," she whispered, "between possession and partnership." The words sank deep. He had no response. She looked up at him, charged, breathless, defiant, unyielding. The storm lit up the room. He moved, and she placed her hand on his chest, stopping him, not pushing back, guiding. "You want something temporary," she said. "I don't." He swallowed. "You don't understand forever," she added. He whispered, "Teach me." "Not yet," she said. Lightning flashed. The electricity in the room spiked. Their argument dissolved into silence, a silence more intimate than any touch. Two warriors, two storms, two souls on opposite ends of a battlefield, standing inches apart, refusing to surrender first. They stayed there until the thunder quieted, until their breaths matched, until the tension became unbearable. But they didn't kiss. They didn't touch. Because Jewel refused to be temporary. And Soren Park, monster, sovereign, destroyer, had not yet learned how to be forever. The 6th night of Soren's vacation arrived with a quiet too perfect to trust, a kind of silence that pressed against the estate like a held breath. By 3:11 a.m., the mountains were black silhouettes. The storm had died, and only the soft hum of generators vibrated through the halls. Jewel slept lightly, the way people with instincts tuned by danger always do. It was her pulse that woke her before her ears did. A sudden tightening of breath, a flicker of dread brushing the back of her neck, her body sitting upright before her mind caught up. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She slid out of bed, feet silent on the cold floor. Then, a whisper of air cut the darkness, the metallic sheen of a blade sliding out, a second shadow that didn't belong in her room. Jewel didn't scream, didn't freeze. She dropped to the floor just as the assassin lunged. The assassin's blade sliced the air above her head. Jewel rolled, grabbed the lamp and smashed it against his wrist. He hissed, but before he could recover, a gunshot shattered the hallway, not from the assassin, from Soren. He moved like death incarnate, wearing only black sweatpants and the violence he carried in his bones. He fired once, clean, precise, killing the first attacker instantly. Blood sprayed the wall. Jewel stared, chest heaving, but it wasn't fear in her eyes. It was recognition. This was the man they called Silence, the man who didn't just survive ambushes. He ended them, but even Saurin didn't see the second attacker. Not until the blade tore across his ribs. The sound was horrifying. A wet rip of flesh, a strangled exhale, a force that dropped him to one knee. Son of... He growled through gritted teeth, staggering. Jewel's heart clenched. Not this, not him, not here. The assassin pulled back his blade for the killing strike, and Jewel moved. No hesitation, no calculation. Instinct. She slammed into the attacker with the force of someone who understood consequences intimately, knocking him off balance. Soren finished him, barely, but the damage was done. Blood pooled beneath him like spilled ink. His shirt soaked instantly. His knees buckled. And for the first time since Jewel met him, Soren Park looked mortal. Go, he rasped, pressing a shaking hand to the wound. Jewel, leave. Now. She stared at him, breath uneven, adrenaline sharp in her veins. No! You don't understand. His voice cracked. There will be more. I said no. Her tone wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was absolute. Soren collapsed onto his side, vision blurring. Jewel, if you stay, you die. She knelt beside him, then stopped wasting energy talking. He blinked at her, sluggish, disbelieving. And that was when she grabbed him under the arms, dragged his blood-soaked weight across the floor, and hauled him into the panic room hidden behind the bookshelf. Soren grunted in pain, every breath a battlefield. Why are you doing this? She shut the panic room door with her foot, the lock sealing them in steel. And for the first time, she looked him dead in the eye. Because I don't run, she said, not from death, and not from men. His eyes widened with something far more devastating than fear, something terrifyingly close to awe. The panic room lights flickered on, sterile, white, merciless. Jewel's breath came sharp, but her hands, steady. She grabbed the combat medkit mounted on the wall and tore it open. She'd learned field medicine years ago working on frontier projects, places where ambulances took hours to arrive, where lives depended on improvised care. Soren watched her through fading vision. You know, field surgery, he muttered, drifting. Don't talk, she snapped. She pressed her jacket hard against the wound, applying pressure until his teeth clenched and his body arched from the pain. Stay with me. You should have run, he breathed. Her eyes flashed. And leave you bleeding like a stray dog? Not my style. She disinfected the wound, cut away the ruined fabric of his shirt, and forced herself not to react to how bad it was. Deep, too deep, close to the liver. But she didn't panic. She stitched, fast, precise, her fingers stained with his blood. Soren's breaths grew shallow. Jewel, he whispered. No, you're not dying tonight. Why? His eyelids fluttered. Why risk yourself? She tied off the last suture, leaned over him, and pressed her palm to his cheek. Her voice was a whisper charged with steel. Because you are not the monster you pretend to be. A tear, silent, shocked, gathered in the corner of Soren's eye. He didn't feel it fall, because he was already unconscious. Jewel sat on the floor beside him, hands shaking only after the danger had passed. She kept pressure on the wound, kept her ear near his mouth to monitor his breathing, kept her eyes on the door even though it was reinforced steel. Hours passed. Rain returned outside. Winds battered the mountains. The estate was chaos beyond the panic room walls. But here it was still cold, too quiet. She brushed his damp hair back from his forehead. "Soren," she whispered, voice cracking for the first time, "if you die, I swear I'll bring you back just to yell at you." He didn't move. She swallowed hard. "Don't leave me with a half-finished week." Her throat tightened. "You owe me the rest." Soren didn't open his eyes, but his fingers twitched, the smallest sign of defiance and survival. Jewel exhaled shakily. Relief, raw, painful, washed over her. Not because she depended on him, not because she forgave his sins, not because she felt safe. Because the man she saved was not the man who kidnapped her. He was someone emerging from the wreckage, someone human, someone she did not yet understand, someone she wasn't ready to lose. The next morning, pain dragged Soren Park out of unconsciousness like a hook in his ribs. He gasped. The world spun. His vision blurred. His breath fought its way into his lungs. His body screamed with every twitch of muscle. White lights, cold floor, stiff bandages tightening around his torso. He knew instantly he was in the panic room. And he knew immediately something was wrong. It was too quiet, too empty, too lonely. He tried to sit up, and agony tore across his ribs like a burning blade. He hissed, teeth clenched, sweat breaking across his forehead. "Jewel," he rasped. No answer. He blinked hard, forcing the world into focus. But her voice did not come. Her silhouette did not appear. Her steady hands did not press to his wound. All he heard was the soft hum of ventilation. And then his gaze landed on a folded piece of paper placed neatly beside the bed. His heart, strong enough to survive gang wars, betrayals, bullets, stumbled. He reached for the note with trembling fingers, opened it, read the ink written in her calm, devastating handwriting. "Thank you for the week, but I do not belong in cages, no matter how pretty." Silence slammed into him, not his weapon, not his armor, a different silence, emptiness, hollow, cold, violent, in the way grief is violent. Soren stared at the note as if it were a foreign object. His pulse hammered, his throat closed. This couldn't be real. She couldn't. He tore off the monitors, forced himself upright, ignoring the pain ripping through him, stumbled toward the panic room door and slammed his hand against the release keypad. The steel door unlocked with a heavy exhale, and when he emerged, the corridor was full of his men, not attacking, not shouting, not panicking, just standing there, quiet, somber, waiting. Soren's voice was raw, cracked, almost unrecognizable even to himself. "Where is she?" A guard swallowed. "Gone, boss." His vision blurred, not from painkillers, from something worse. He stepped forward, menace rippling beneath his skin. "Lock down the estate, seal the gates, ground the helicopters. No one leaves until—" "Boss," his captain said gently, daring to interrupt him for the first time in years. "Don't." Soren stopped. The air shifted. Every man in that hallway stiffened, bracing for an eruption. "She walked out," the captain continued carefully, "on her own, on her terms." "I didn't give permission," Soren choked. "You don't control her." Another guard swallowed. "No one does." Soren's jaw tightened until it trembled. Lockdown, he repeated. It was an order delivered through clenched teeth, dripping with threat. No one moved. No one obeyed. These were men who had burned buildings for him, bled for him, killed for him. But now they looked conflicted, steady, unmoved. Boss, the captain said softly, she earned her exit. You owe her that. Owe, a word Soren had never allowed in his vocabulary. I saved her life, he growled. She saved yours, a guard replied. Soren staggered, not from injury, from impact. The realization hit him like a falling skyscraper. He had built empires, commanded syndicates, ruled cities. Seoul feared him. Tokyo respected him. Shanghai calculated around him. He owned everything he could touch, manipulate, or demolish. But Jewel slipped through his fingers without even looking back. She left on her terms, her timing, her direction. And she left him with nothing but a note and a wound that wasn't in his body, but in his foundation. Soren staggered forward, gripping the wall, chest tightening. He whispered, barely audible, barely human. She left me. The captain lowered his gaze. Boss? She didn't run. She simply walked where you couldn't follow. Soren pressed a hand over his stitched wound, but it wasn't the injury that hurt. It was the truth pressing against his ribs like another blade. He controlled the underworld. He controlled the syndicates. He controlled fear itself. But Jewel Omondi, she controlled him. In a way no gun, no empire, no past ever had. And she walked away, leaving the destroyer to confront something far more terrifying than death, a world without her in it. Shanghai welcomed Jewel back with its usual blend of neon and noise, the sharp scent of rain on steel, the hum of ambition in every passing face. She breathed it in, rolling her suitcase through her apartment door, telling herself she'd return to normal. Routine, work, stability, numbers that didn't bleed. She scrubbed Soren's estate from her skin, scrubbed his blade from her memory, scrubbed his voice from her dreams. She expected him to fade. He didn't. That night, she slept and woke up gasping. Because in her dream he had laughed, not the cold, weaponized sound he used on the world, but the real one he gave her. Unfiltered, unarmored, human. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. This is ridiculous, she whispered to her empty room. But the dreams kept coming. His shadow, his breath, his storm. Not because she wanted the monster, but because she'd glimpsed the man buried underneath. Meanwhile, Seoul spiraled with him. Soren Park walked into the war room with a deathly stillness that made every advisor freeze. Red eyes, toned muscles taut with pain and fury. Stitches beneath his shirt pulling with every breath. He looked like a ghost trying to outrun its own grave. Meeting, he said. The room filled, and he detonated. You're all fired. Gasps, dropped pens. A chair scraped across the marble. Boss, what? You heard me. His voice was ice-wrapped in steel. Half of you leak information. The rest of you are slow. He pointed to the door. Get out! The advisors scrambled. His empire shuddered. Soren dove into the investigation himself. He hunted the syndicate that sent the attackers, tracked names, found hideouts, interrogated leaders with a brutality starting to scare even his own men. Days passed. Nights bled into each other. He didn't sleep, didn't eat properly, didn't touch a woman, didn't even look at one. His bed stayed cold. His nights stayed long. His mind stayed fixed on her. Jewel's voice, dismantling his lies. Jewel's hands, saving his life. Jewel's footsteps fading as she walked away. He tried to forget her. Instead, he whispered her name into the dark. Jewel. Once, twice, again, as if the name itself was a wound he was afraid to let close. Her report, the one she'd rewritten, reorganized, rebuilt with her sharp mind, became his obsession. He read them until his eyes burned. He memorized her formulas. He recalculated the risk models the way she had taught. His men found him one night on the floor of the war room, sitting among her papers, shirt unbuttoned, stitches bleeding, staring at graphs like they were scripture. "Boss," one guard said carefully, "you haven't slept in 48 hours. Soren didn't look up. "This model's wrong." "No, sir, it's Jules." He exhaled slowly. "Then I'm wrong." It was the closest he'd ever come to admitting defeat. On the 7th day of his spiral, his men cornered him in his private study. 3 senior guards, men who had followed him through blood and fire. "Boss, we need to talk." "Not now." "Now." Soren's eyes lifted, cold, deadly. The captain took a breath. "You're not stable. You're not sleeping. And you're firing people left and right." Silence. "And since Jewel left," the guard added softly, "you haven't smiled. Not even your fake one." Soren stiffened. Pain flickered behind his eyes. Real pain, terrifying in its vulnerability. "Boss," the man swallowed, "be honest with yourself. You're in love." Soren moved so fast they didn't see the chair fly across the room until it shattered against the wall. "I said enough." The guards didn't flinch. "She saw you," another added. "That scares you more than a bullet." Soren slammed both palms on the desk, chest heaving. "I don't love anyone." "We didn't say love was a weakness," the captain whispered. "We said it's killing you to pretend you don't feel it." His breathing stuttered. His hands trembled. And then he sank into his chair, slowly, quietly, like the weight of truth was finally crushing him. After a long moment, his voice came out rough, unsteady. "How?" he asked, staring at the floor. "Do I earn her?" The room went silent, because the destroyer, the sovereign of Seoul, the man who controlled empires, had finally accepted the one truth Jewel had known all along. Some kingdoms can't be built with power, only with surrender. A few days later, Shanghai was drowning in rain, not the gentle kind, the kind that fell like accusation, relentless, cold, stripping the city down to bone. People rushed under umbrellas. Taxis sprayed water in arcs. The neon lights flickered through sheets of storm. Inside her office lobby, Jewel Omondi stood with a tablet in hand, talking numbers with her assistant. Steady, composed, brilliant as ever, until the air changed. Her assistant's sentence trailed off. The guards by the door stiffened, not in fear, in confusion, and Jewel felt her breath catch in her chest before she even turned fully. Because there, outside the glass doors, soaked, motionless, alone, stood Soren Park. But not Soren Park, the destroyer. Not the monster of soul. Not the sovereign who made syndicates swallow their tongues. This man had no guards behind him. No black cars, no entourage, no power radiating like a storm. He was just a man standing in the rain, looking like his world had ended without her. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His shirt clung to the scars on his torso. His hands were empty. And his eyes. God, they were terrified. Human. Alive. Her assistant whispered, "Should I call security?" "No," Jewel said, voice barely above the rain's roar. She walked toward the glass as if pulled by gravity. Soren didn't move, didn't blink. Only when she reached the door, when he was inches away, separated by thin glass, did he lift his hand and press it lightly to the surface. Her throat tightened. She opened the door. Rain crashed into the lobby entrance, wind slicing between them, drenching her in seconds. They stood face to face for the first time since she left him bleeding in a panic room. Soren swallowed, hard. "I'm not here to take," he said quietly. "I'm not here to force anything. I'm not here to claim you." His voice was stripped raw, sandpaper over old wounds. "I came alone," he added, "to show you I learned something." Jules stared, heart pounding, waiting. He stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, like approaching a wild, sacred creature. "I don't want 7 days," he whispered. His voice broke. "I want whatever comes after 7, if you'll let me try." Rain ran down his face like tears he would never allow himself to shed. She studied him. No arrogance, no manipulation, no threats, no armor. He was shaking, not from the cold, but from the fear of being turned away. For Soren Park, fear was always a battlefield. Tonight, he stood in it unweaponed. Jewel lifted her chin slightly. "You walked away from everything you know," she said softly. "I would burn the whole empire," he replied, "if it meant meeting you on level ground." She felt the truth of it in her bones, not the promise itself, but the man saying it, the one who never promised anything. Her voice steadied. "This isn't a vacation, Soren." Her eyes didn't waver. "This is forever." A long silence stretched between them, the kind that rewrites futures. Then he nodded once, slow, reverent, almost like a surrender. "Then teach me." Something inside her cracked, not with weakness, but with recognition. The monster she met was gone. The sovereign had lowered his crown. The destroyer had opened his hands. Only the man remained. She reached for him. He froze. Not because he didn't want it, but because he couldn't believe it was real. Her fingers slid through his. Warm, steady. A connection that felt less like touch and more like truth. Soren inhaled sharply, and for the first time in his entire life, he belonged. Not to duty, not to rage, not to power. To her. Jewel glanced toward the city. "Come on," she murmured. "Shanghai's waiting." And they walked out together. Not captor and captive, not obsession and challenge, not fire and ice locked in combat, but equals, side by side. Soren Park, Seoul's sovereign, left the reign with a truth he'd never imagined possible. He had finally found a world worth protecting, because it walked beside him. 1 year later, Shanghai glittered beneath them like a sea of burning constellations. Jewel stood on the rooftop terrace of the new Park Omondi headquarters, her elbows resting on the glass railing, the wind tugging gently at her curls. The skyline had changed in a year. New towers rising, new deals igniting, new power shifting beneath her fingertips. But the greatest change wasn't the city. It was the man who came up behind her. Soren Park slipped his arms around her waist, lowering his face into the soft crook of her neck. His scent, cedar, rain, the faintest trace of her own perfume, enveloped her. A year ago, he'd walked through storm water just to ask for a chance. Now, he stood beside her, not as a king demanding a throne, but as a man who rebuilt one with her. The Park Syndicate was no longer something he commanded from shadows. It was something they reshaped together. Jewel rewrote the entire financial skeleton of the organization. Soren dismantled half the criminal operations himself, choosing legitimacy over fear. Their combined influence stretched from Seoul's legal markets to Shanghai's innovation corridors. Investors whispered their names like a prophecy Park and Omondi, Seoul's sovereign and Shanghai's queen, the empire of precision and fire. Together, they were unstoppable, not because he was ruthless, not because she was brilliant, but because he finally learned how to build instead of destroy. One beautiful night inside their penthouse, the lights glowed golden, warm against the cool expanse of glass. Jewel walked in ahead of him, and Soren followed, discarding his jacket, loosening his tie, something he only ever did around her. The stitches from a year ago had healed into a thin scar, a mark he never hid. She ran her hand over it sometimes, like now. Her palms skimmed beneath his shirt, tracing the scar that had once kept him inches from death. He caught her wrist gently. "Does it bother you?" she asked softly. He shook his head, voice low. "It reminds me who saved me." "And who almost lost you," she murmured. His fingers moved to her chin, lifting her gaze toward him. "You never lost anything," he whispered. "You walked away. I followed." She smiled, slow, devastating, intimate, and he kissed her. It wasn't a hungry kiss, not the battling kind, not the possessive kind he used to give to a world that feared him. It was a kiss made of gratitude and surrender, a kiss that tasted like home. His hand slid around her hips. Hers rested on his shoulders. The room darkened around them, and the city's lights painted them in gold. Later, wrapped in a blanket on the floor of the living room, the rain beginning to tap against the windows, Jewel rested her head on his chest. His fingers drifted through her curls absent-mindedly. He had never touched anyone this gently. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly, "leaving that old life behind?" He hesitated, but not out of conflict, out of reverence. "No," he said. "I regret not finding you sooner." She closed her eyes. "And you?" he added. "Any regrets?" Jewel thought of the panic room, the blade, the decision she made to save him, and how that choice had rewritten everything. "No," she whispered against his skin, "just a certainty." "Of what?" "That you're the first man I've ever met who learned how to fight for someone instead of fighting over them." His chest rose beneath her cheek, slow, deep, humbled. "Only because you taught me," he said. She smiled. "And what did you teach me?" she asked. Soren brushed his thumb across her lower lip. "That even the strongest woman deserves to rest." Her heart tightened. He kissed her forehead. "And I intend," he said softly, "to be the man who makes sure you always can." At midnight, the rain stopped. Shanghai glowed beneath them, alive, vast, endless. Jewel rose to her feet and held out her hand. Soren took it instantly. They stood at the glass wall, hands intertwined, watching the city, the queen and her sovereign. The destroyer turned builder, the strategist turned partner. He pressed a kiss to her temple. She leaned into him, warm and steady. "Ready?" she asked. "For what?" he murmured. "For whatever comes after forever." Soren exhaled, breath trembling with something close to awe. "With you." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I'm ready for everything." Their reflections shimmered in the glass. Two people bound by choice, rebuilt by fire, anchored by something the world couldn't touch. Not power, not fear, not trauma. Love, earned, not demanded. Love, lived, not performed. Love, equal, not conquered. And as the night wrapped around them, Soren Park finally understood what it meant to win without destroying. It meant walking beside the woman who taught him how. The end. Sometimes the most powerful love story is when the ruthless learns how to build, because she refused to be destroyed. If this touched your heart today, Subscribe plus come back for more unstoppable AMBW love.